Hello and welcome back to another episode of Colour With Me, where I, the Black Gallerina, talk about decolonial theory, curatorial practice and contemporary art galleries while colouring away. For this video, I am colouring in a picture I drew inspired by the scene in the Disney animated Snow White film where Snow White is kind of dead, but instead of burying her, the dwarves felt like it's appropriate to put her body on display indefinitely so others can enjoy her beauty. I thought that it would be relevant to the topic of discussion today, which is about how the contemporary art world capitalises on Black trauma and the exploitation of Black artists. For tools, I will be using the Arteza Everblend skin tone marker set, some Ohuhu brush markers, and Ohuhu Marker Paper Pad. As always, you can find out more information about these materials in the description box of this video. And with all that said, let's get colouring. The two key terms are racial capitalism and trauma porn. The term racial capitalism was first coined by the late Professor Cedric J. Robertson to describe the relationship between modern capitalism and racism. In 1983, he published a book titled Black Marxism, The Making of the Black Radical Tradition, in which he wrote that the historical development of world capitalism was influenced in the most fundamental way by the particularistic forces of racism and nationalism. Nowadays, the term racial capitalism is more commonly used to refer to the process of deriving social and economic value from the racial identity of another person, as described by Professor Nancy Leong in her 2013 article titled Racial Capitalism. The definition of trauma porn, which I will be using for the purposes of this video, is by the interdisciplinary artist Brittany J. In her article titled What Trauma Porn Is and Why It Hurts Black People, she describes trauma porn as being media that showcases a group's pain and trauma in excessive amounts for the sake of entertainment. Trauma porn is created not for the sake of the marginalized group, but instead to console and entertain the non-marginalized group. It also has the tendency to cater to the non-marginalized person's ego versus actually helping the marginalized group depict what life is actually like for them. I wanted to write about this topic because the past year has really made me reflect on how the exhibition and sharing of Black pain and death has become a stand-in for anti-racist work across society. Specifically how this activity is positioned as educational and awareness-raising whilst disregarding the mental health and well-being of living Black people. When it comes to the art world, trauma porn has become a way for some galleries to benefit from institutional racism through their curatorial powers. While I think that the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, along with the increasing reliance on social media, has contributed to the pervasiveness of this phenomenon, my concerns around this issue actually emerged a few years before the pandemic. When I first began my career in the art sector, I started to recognise a pattern in the ways in which many contemporary art galleries programmed Black artists. Coming from working in the higher education sector, it was easy to see the similarities between the academy and galleries when it came to looking at how these institutions decided to include Black people. When I look back to all my years in the British education system, I cannot recall many instances where I studied the culture and histories of the Black diaspora free from a white colonial gaze. A white colonial gaze which could only conceptualise Black people as Black bodies. There were a few times where I can remember seeing Black knowledge being discussed outside a race-themed week within specific modules or during the classic Black History Month programme. Even then, the topics of discussions that I recall taking place were often limited to the transatlantic slave trade, racial trauma and death, as if Black people made no other contributions to any other areas of knowledge. It didn't take me long to see that in the art world, the work of Black artists was often represented in a similar way, and the subject of Black trauma was also a theme of great interest. I think that if the focus for this kind of trauma-orientated work was aimed at producing creative spaces for healing within Black communities, this might not be such a problematic issue. However, when you consider how white-dominated many of the audiences of these galleries are, you may begin to understand how very awkward these types of exhibitions can be in reality. As I met and spoke to more and more Black artists, I became aware of the difficulties some of them were facing when it came to trying to find support to produce and exhibit work that didn't centre racism and Black trauma. There are, of course, Black artists and artists of colour who sometimes choose to create art that explores racial trauma. However, what I think some galleries fail to comprehend is that these artists are capable of making other types of work, and that their work can also be shown throughout the year and not just for special occasions. A really prominent example of this kind of exploitation within a US gallery would be New York's Whitney's Museum of Art and the cancelled exhibition, which was titled Collective Actions: Artist Interventions in a Time of Change. The exhibition was scheduled to open in September 2020 and was supposed to showcase work inspired by the 2020 Black Lives Matter uprising. However, it was revealed that a lot of the artwork was acquired from Black artists through BLM fundraising art sales. Therefore, the museum purchased many pieces of work at a discounted rate. The museum also failed to tell artists that their work was going to be included in the exhibit. While this particular situation happened in the US, I assure you that this type of racial capitalism also takes place in UK art institutions. For example, one of the latest submissions to my Gallery So White online exhibition is from a curator who was commissioned by a large gallery in London to produce an exhibition in response to Black Lives Matter. This was a few years ago, by the way. They wrote, "I was part of curating an exhibition at a major gallery, and throughout the whole process the team made it infinitely more difficult. Bearing in mind we had been sought out to exhibit and curate a month-long series, it took about 6 months of back and forth to even agree on an acceptable pay rate that wasn't laughable. This would at least make sense if it was a small independent gallery, but this was a huge institution with wealthy benefactors. We also found out that our white counterparts exhibiting in the same space were being offered more." Unlike the Whitney Museum exhibition, this show actually went ahead. A whole program inspired by conversations and campaigns against anti-Black racism was made by Black people who had experienced anti-Black institutional racism whilst producing the work. One thing that I have learned so far during this research project is that galleries are really good at hiding the exploitative practices that go into some of their most progressive looking projects. There was another submission to Gallery So White which talked about the ways in which galleries appropriate the identities of Black artists to use as evidence of their commitment to racial equity. The submission came from a Black artist working in the southeast of England. They wrote, "I have found galleries in the UK to be difficult spaces to navigate, mostly in terms of my race and class. I find the work some galleries do to be appropriative or exploitative. Appropriative in the sense that once a gallery shows one or two Black artists, they then take some ownership of the artist's Blackness. Photographs, posters, the artist's face front and centre to add a bit of diversity, not too much that you alienate your white liberal audience who can only take so much guilt before they start to feel victimised. The act of showing a handful of Black artists every year means that galleries can claim to be radical and anti-racist spaces without ever doing the work. This is a good example of how the constructed hyper-visibility of this marginalised group of artists and cultural workers creates a false image of progress within these institutions. I think that the art world has reached a point that the notion that the work needs to be done is undeniable. This is clear by the numerous anti-racism statements that emerged as a result of Black Lives Matter. However, we must be aware that there are galleries that have managed to commodify the concept of doing the work. They loudly claim to champion diversity and to be inclusive of Black artists, but what they've actually done is find alternative ways to further capitalise on the marginalisation of Black people and our collective trauma. Well, that's all for this episode of Colour With Me. I hope that you found that helpful. If you want to find out more about any of the terms and topics that I've discussed today, please see the description box of this video for a list of relevant links. Also, if you enjoy videos like this, please Please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. If you do subscribe, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future uploads. Thank you for watching, take care and see you soon.